The village was quiet. Nestled between endless fields and untouched forests, Domremy was the kind of place the world forgot. No kings walked its roads. No armies marched through its soil. No history was meant to be written there. Only farmers, only silence. And a girl. Her name was Joan. She was not born into power. She was not trained for war. She could not read nor write. But history does not ask permission before it chooses someone. It was the 15th century. France was broken. The Guerra dos 100 Años had torn the land apart. Villages burned, kingdoms fell, and the English crown tightened its grip over French soil. The rightful king had not yet become king. Hope was not just fading, it was already gone. And yet, in the middle of that forgotten village, something impossible began. Joan was only 13 when she first heard it. A voice. Not from the outside, but from somewhere deeper. Something divine. At first, she said nothing. Who would believe her? A farmer's daughter claiming she could hear messages from heaven? It would sound like madness, or worse, blasphemy. But the voice did not leave. It returned, again and again. Clearer each time, stronger. It spoke of purpose, of destiny, of something far greater than the quiet life that awaited her. She tried to ignore it. She tried to remain what the world expected her to be. But the voice did not ask. It demanded. It told her France would not fall. It told her she had been chosen. Chosen to save it. Think about that. A teenage girl, no training, no status, no army, and a command that would terrify even kings. Lead. Fight. Restore the crown. Most would have buried that voice. Most would have called it a dream, or fear, or illusion. But Joan listened. Years passed. The war worsened. English forces advanced, cities surrendered, and whispers began to spread across the land. France was dying. But inside Joan, something was awakening. The voice returned, no longer gentle. Now it was urgent. Now it was clear. You must go. Not someday, not eventually. Now. She resisted. She argued. She doubted herself. Because how could this be real? How could someone like her change the fate of a kingdom? But destiny does not negotiate. It pushes. It breaks. It forces action. And one day, Joan made her choice. She would leave everything behind. Her home, her family, her past. She would walk into a world ruled by men, by war, by power. And she would demand to be heard. Not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a messenger, sent by God. People would laugh, people would doubt. Some would fear her, others would try to silence her. But none of that mattered anymore. Because when belief becomes stronger than fear, there is no turning back. The girl from Domremy was gone, and in her place, something else had begun. Not a soldier, not yet. Not a leader, not yet. But something far more dangerous. Someone who believed she had been chosen. And belief has started more wars than armies ever could. The world did not know her name, not yet, but it would, soon.
The road to destiny is never open. It is guarded, tested, and often designed to break those who are not meant to pass. When Joan left Domremy, she carried nothing that could prove her purpose. No title, no weapon, no authority. Only a claim that could cost her life. That she had been sent by God. The world she stepped into was not kind. France was fractured, humiliated, and desperate. The Guerra dos 100 Años had drained its strength, and trust had become a rare commodity. People lied, people betrayed, people pretended to be saviors. So when a teenage girl arrived claiming divine guidance, she was not welcomed. She was questioned relentlessly. In the town of Vaucouleurs, Joan faced her first real barrier: men of war, soldiers hardened by years of bloodshed, commanders who had seen too many die to believe in miracles. They looked at her and saw nothing, just a girl. They mocked her, dismissed her, told her to return home where she belonged. But Joan did not leave. She stood her ground. Day after day, she returned, speaking with the same certainty, the same calm, the same unshakable conviction. She spoke of victory, of liberation, of a crown that had not yet been claimed. And slowly, something began to change, because confidence, when it refuses to break, becomes contagious. One man began to listen, then another, then doubt turned into curiosity, and curiosity into belief. Not because they understood her, but because she did not waver. Eventually, they gave her what she needed: a chance. She was granted passage to meet the uncrowned King of France, Carlos VII. It was a journey that could have ended everything. Hundreds of miles across dangerous territory, enemy forces, bandits, spies, and a single mistake would expose her as a fraud, or worse, a heretic. But Joan pressed forward, dressed not as a peasant, but in armor, cutting her hair, taking on the appearance of a soldier, not to become one, but to survive long enough to fulfill her mission. Every step of that journey was a test, not just of courage, but of belief. Because doubt travels with you. It whispers, it questions, it tries to pull you back into safety. But Joan did not turn around. When she finally arrived at the court, she was walking into the most dangerous moment of her life. The future of France stood before her, hidden among his own court. Because Carlos VII did not trust easily. To test her, he disguised himself among the crowd, a trap. If she was lying, she would fail. If she was guessing, she would hesitate. If she was nothing more than a delusional girl, this would be the end. Joan entered the room, surrounded by nobles, eyes watching, judging, waiting for her to break. And then, without hesitation, she walked past everyone, past the men dressed in power, past the illusion of authority, and stopped in front of the real king. Silence filled the room, because in that moment, something impossible had just happened. She bowed and addressed him correctly. No confusion, no doubt, only certainty. The court did not understand, but they felt it. That quiet, unsettling feeling when reality does not behave the way it should. Still, belief is not given easily, not in times of war, not when kingdoms are at stake. So Joan was tested again, this time by the church. Clerics examined her, questioned her visions, searched for cracks in her story, for signs of madness or deception. Days turned into weeks, interrogations, observations, pressure designed to make her contradict herself. But she did not break. Her answers never changed, her conviction never faltered. And eventually, they reached a conclusion. Not that they fully understood her, but that they could not prove her wrong. And in a kingdom on the brink of collapse, that was enough. Carlos VII made his decision. He would trust her, not completely, not without doubt, but enough to take the risk. Because sometimes, when everything else has failed, you listen to the impossible. Joan was given armor, a banner, and something far more powerful than either: an army. Men who had spent years losing. Men who had forgotten what victory felt like.
Men who now stood under the command of someone who had never fought a battle in her life. It should have been absurd. It should have failed. But something had already begun to shift, because war is not only fought with steel, it is fought with belief. And for the first time in years, France had something it had almost lost: hope. The girl who arrived with nothing now stood at the edge of history, and the next step would change everything.
War does not wait. It consumes, it destroys, and it does not care who you are. When Joan arrived at the battlefield, she was stepping into a reality far different from the one in her visions. This was not glory. This was chaos. The city of Orléans was on the brink of collapse, surrounded, starving, days away from falling into English hands. If Orléans fell, France would follow. The soldiers knew it, the commanders knew it, and the enemy was waiting. The English army stood confident, disciplined, experienced, relentless. They had already broken France once, and they were ready to finish the job. So when word spread through the camps that reinforcements had arrived, led by a teenage girl, they laughed. Of course they did. Because war is not won by belief. It is won by steel. Or at least, that's what they thought. Joan entered the city not as a general, but as something harder to define. She did not shout commands. She did not boast. She did not pretend to be something she wasn't. Instead, she carried a banner, white, marked with symbols of faith. She did not come to replace the soldiers. She came to awaken them. At first, the commanders resisted her. They delayed attacks, ignored her urgency, treated her like a symbol, not a leader. But Joan saw something they didn't. Time was running out. Every hesitation cost lives. Every delay strengthened the enemy. So she did something unexpected. She pushed forward, not with rank, but with conviction. She urged the army to act, to stop waiting, to fight. And slowly, reluctantly, they listened. The first assault was brutal. Arrows darkened the sky, walls burned, men fell. And in the middle of it all, Joan moved forward. Not behind the lines, not protected, but visible, exposed, fearless. And that changed everything. Because soldiers do not follow orders alone. They follow belief. And for the first time in years, they saw someone who truly believed they could win. Battle after battle, something impossible began to unfold. Positions that should have held collapsed. Defenses that seemed unbreakable fell. Momentum shifted, and the English army started to feel something they hadn't in a long time: uncertainty. Then came the moment that should have ended it all. During one of the assaults, Joan was struck. An arrow pierced her body. She fell, and for a brief moment, everything stopped. Because this was reality. This was what happens in war. The symbol falls, and everything collapses with it. The soldiers hesitated. The advance weakened. Doubt returned like a storm. But Joan did not die. She rose, wounded, in pain, but standing. And when the soldiers saw her, still holding her banner, still moving forward, something ignited. Not just courage, something deeper. Fury, faith. Desperation transformed into force, and they charged. Not because they were ordered to, but because they believed. The English lines broke, fortress after fortress fell, and then, after months of siege, it happened. Orléans was free. The impossible had become reality.
A city that was meant to fall had been saved. And with it, something far greater returned. Hope. But victory has a cost. Because when you rise too fast, the world begins to question you, fear you, resist you. Joan was no longer just a girl with a vision. She was becoming something else. A symbol, a threat, a force that could no longer be ignored. And that would change how the world saw her, not just as a savior, but as something far more dangerous, someone who could not be controlled. The war was not over, not even close. But one thing was now undeniable. The tide had turned. And at the center of it all stood a girl who was never meant to be there.
Victory changes everything, but not always in the way you expect.
After the liberation of Orléans, Joan was no longer just a messenger. She was a symbol, a force that had done what armies could not. And with that came attention, came pressure, came resistance. Because power does not like to be challenged, especially by someone it cannot control. Joan pushed forward. She had not come this far for a single victory. Her mission was not just to win battles, but to restore a king, to place Carlos VII on the throne he had not yet claimed. So she urged the army onward, toward Reims, the city of coronation. The path was dangerous, enemy territory, strongholds still loyal to the English crown. And yet, something unusual happened. Cities began to open their gates, not because they were conquered, but because they surrendered, without a fight. Because the story of Joan had already arrived before her, and belief was spreading faster than war. Step by step, victory after victory, the impossible continued, until finally they reached Reims, and inside its cathedral, history was rewritten. Carlos VII was crowned king. The moment Joan had been sent to fulfill was complete. For a brief moment, everything aligned. The war had turned, the king had risen, and the girl who came from nothing had changed the fate of a nation. This should have been the ending, but it wasn't. Because once a symbol fulfills its purpose, the world begins to question what to do with it next. Joan wanted to continue, to finish what had been started, to drive the enemy out completely. But the court was different now. The urgency was gone, the desperation had faded, and with it, so did their reliance on her. Advisors whispered, nobles hesitated. Power shifted back into familiar hands, hands that did not trust her, hands that never truly believed. Joan felt it, the distance, the hesitation, the quiet rejection. But she did not stop. Because belief does not fade just because others lose it. She continued to fight, with fewer resources, less support, and growing isolation, until the moment everything broke. In the city of Compiègne, during another battle, Joan was captured, not by the English, but by their allies, the Burgundians, sold, handed over, like an asset, like a problem to be removed. And just like that, the girl who led armies was now a prisoner. Chains replaced armor. Silence replaced command. And the war moved on without her. She was taken to trial, not as a soldier, but as something far more dangerous. A heretic. The charges were not about war. They were about her voice, her visions, her claim that she had been chosen, because if that was true, it threatened everything: authority, religion, power itself. So they tried to break her. Days turned into weeks, interrogations without end, questions designed to trap her, to force contradiction, to create doubt. Because if they could prove she was lying, then everything she had done could be erased. But Joan did not collapse. She answered, carefully, firmly, holding on to the same belief that brought her there, even when it meant standing alone. Because where was the king now? Where were the men she had led? Where was Carlos VII, the man she had crowned? He did nothing. No rescue, no negotiation, no intervention. Silence. And that silence spoke louder than any accusation. Joan had given everything, and in return, she was abandoned. The trial was never meant to be fair. It was meant to end one way, and eventually, it did. Guilty. Not of war, not of violence, but of belief. She was sentenced to death. Execution by fire. Public. Slow. Unforgiving. And in that moment, the girl who changed history stood alone.
Something feels very wrong here.
No army, no banner, no crown. Only the same thing she had at the beginning. Faith. The same faith that led her here. The same faith that now would be tested one final time. They thought fire would end her, that flames would erase her name, that fear would silence her story. They were wrong. On May 30th, 1431, in the city of Rouen, the crowd gathered, not for a battle, not for a coronation, but for an execution, a spectacle, a warning, because this was not just about a girl. This was about control, about proving that no one, no matter how powerful their belief, could stand against the systems that ruled the world. Joan was brought forward in chains. No armor, no banner, no army. The same girl who once stood at the front of thousands now stood alone. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. Some came to watch. Some came to judge. Some came because they had no choice. But no one truly understood what they were about to witness. The sentence was clear. Death by fire, one of the cruelest ends imaginable. Slow, public, unforgiving. The flames would not just kill her, they would send a message. But even then, even in that moment, Joan did not beg. She did not deny her faith. She did not take back her words. Because belief is easy when it leads to victory. The real test is whether it survives when everything is taken from you. The executioner hesitated, not out of defiance, but because something about this felt wrong. Even those who stood against her felt it. That quiet, uncomfortable realization that they might be destroying something pure, something real. But the order had been given, and history does not pause for doubt. The fire was lit. At first, smoke, rising slowly, wrapping around her, blurring the line between the world and what came next. Then flames, climbing, consuming, relentless. The crowd watched, some in silence, some in fear, some unable to look away. And in the middle of it all, Joan remained, not screaming in panic, not collapsing in despair, but holding on to the same thing that brought her there, faith. They say her final words were not of anger, not of regret, but of God. Because even as the fire rose, she never believed she had been abandoned. And then, it was over. The flames died, the smoke faded, and the girl from Domremy was gone. Or at least, that's what they thought. Because you can burn a body, but you cannot burn an idea. You cannot erase what has already changed the world. In the years that followed, something unexpected happened. Doubt began to grow. Questions began to rise. Had they made a mistake? Had they silenced a heretic or destroyed a saint? Time passed, and truth has a way of resurfacing. Years later, her trial was revisited, re-examined, and overturned. Joan was declared innocent, not a fraud, not a heretic, but something far greater. A martyr, a symbol of faith, courage, and defiance against impossible odds. And centuries later, the world would go even further, recognizing her not just as a figure of history, but as a saint. Joan of Arc became immortal, not because she lived, but because she believed, because she stood firm when the world demanded she break, because she changed the course of a war without ever being meant to stand in one. And in the end, that is what history remembers. Not power, not titles, not armies, but the moments when someone dares to defy what is supposed to be possible. The girl with no education, no status, no reason to be heard, became the voice that a nation followed. And even today, when her story is told, it does not feel distant. It does not feel forgotten, because some names are not buried by time. They are carried by it. And even today, her name echoes through history.